All right, so next we want to address the issue of how you choose refrigerants. So most of the early refrigerants that people were so fond of were all called Freon. Freon was a brand name essentially, but they were all CFCs. They contained chlorofluorocarbons, which means they were hydrocarbons with a chlorine and a fluorine or more attached to them in various ways. And unfortunately, what we discovered a little bit late in the cycle of all of this is that they release chlorine when they decompose. And the problem with chlorine is it reacts with ozone to produce O2. Okay, now this doesn't sound like a bad thing because we think, oh, ozone down at the layer where we live and breathe is going to cause like problems with asthma and things like that. And we consider it a pollutant at low altitudes. But up in the ozone layer, it's essential for keeping the Earth at a comfortable temperature for us. And so the chlorine would be released as these CFCs would decompose. It would rise because it's very low density, and it would go up into the ozone layer, breaking it down, producing oxygen, which, okay, yeah, that's great. We can breathe oxygen, but it also increased the global warming. And there were quite a few of these freons or CFCs that were being used. R11, R12, R13, R22, R502, and R503 were among that class of compounds. And R12 and R22 were probably the ones that were best known in that category. But in 1987, finally people got wise and said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. We're ruining the Earth just so we can stay cool. So CFCs were banned. And what they came up with next was hydrofluorocarbons. So they got rid of the chlorine. They don't reduce the chlorine, which is really bad, but they still have fluorine in them, which actually isn't so awesome itself. It does a little bit of the same sort of thing. So we were still contributing to the global warming problem using all of these various refrigerants. So people are phasing these out and looking for new compounds all the time, and so things change constantly. So in our cars back in the day, long time ago, we used to use refrigerant 12, which was just what most people called Freon. And then that's been replaced with R134A. You'll find this data in your textbook, and you'll find this data in textbooks that are maybe 10 years old, not that long ago. But even this one has now come under fire because it's one of those HFCs. And so now then, the newest one that people are using is tetrafluoropropene, which that's a mouthful of a word. So R1234YF. Not that that's a lot better, but that's what people call this. And then some people are using CO2. Refrigerators, like what you have in your home, probably use R22 if it's old, and R410A if it's only a few years old, and if it's brand new, you might be using R600, which is isobutane. Now the problem with isobutane is it's flammable. Some refrigerators, especially commercial ones, may use ammonia, NH3. Problem there is poisonous. People have systems in their houses for dealing with combustion systems, okay, so fires. We have fire alarms and smoke alarms, and so it's deemed that this is less of a problem in a house than ammonia because poisoning everyone in the house probably is a bad idea. But these are the kinds of concerns that people are having to think about these days as they select the refrigerants. So, kind of a checklist of things to think about is, first you've got to think about safety. Is the material hazardous? But I also am going to have to think about things like, how long is it going to persist in the atmosphere? And then once it breaks down, what is that going to do? But I'm also going to have practical limitations, like, is the phase change possible? Okay, can it go from liquid to vapor? Right, it's vapor compression. If I don't go back and forth from liquid to vapor, I'm not going to have my refrigerator actually function. Okay. And I have an issue of, will solids be formed? If you were running water in the lines trying to run a freezer, it's going to freeze, right? It's going to be a solid, which will no longer flow through a pipe. So these are very practical considerations. And then I have issues of expense. So how high is the pressure going to have to be in order to get the temperatures I want? That's going to mean the equipment will cost more. And then also just the fluid cost. If you have to replace it when there are slow leaks in the system, that's going to get expensive and people don't want to pay that. But then also these materials tend to be corrosive. And so am I going to actually create more leaks because of this change in material? And maybe I'm putting R502 into an old system that had R12, and maybe the 502 isn't compatible with all of the piping I had before. So now then I've got something where it wasn't a corrosion problem, but I put this in and it starts eating away at my old tubes that I had in the system. So these are all the kinds of things that we're going to need to think about as we select our refrigerants. Now, fortunately, on this issue of the effect on the atmosphere, people have created a quantification, the global warming potential of various refrigerants. Basically, big number is bad, little number is good. And you may be surprised, okay, so refrigerant 12, which I said was the old Freon for car air conditioner systems, that's a really high number. It's really, really bad. Refrigerant 134A, which replaced it, is lower, but it's still not all that awesome. And the R1234YF, which I said is the newer one, oh, that's only a 4. That's not so bad. But I also said that sometimes we'd use CO2, which is a 1. Now we think of carbon dioxide as actually being bad for global warming. But we're releasing it down at the atmospheric level where if there are plants and so forth around, they can help absorb it. So compared to some of these others, it's dandy. Ammonia actually has the lowest ranking, but remember, it's a poison. So we have a different set of issues there. So there's really not a perfect choice, but you're going to have to weigh all the various possibilities and see which one is best. So in the example for this section, we're going to look at just a really simple refrigerator operating from -20 to +40 degrees C. Sorry about that weird negative sign over there. The evaporator is going to produce saturated vapor and the condenser will produce saturated liquid. Just for simplicity, what I want us to do is look at various working fluids. Now, not all of these will have data in your textbook. We'll have to go to other sources for this. But let's look at these and come up with a recommendation for which of these we think would do the best job. And again, we will be doing the example in class.